All right, welcome everybody. I'm Mark Weathington, Director of the JCRA Arboretum. Thank you for joining us for our Gardening 101 series. We have a few things coming up that I wanted to mention to everybody listening today. We have this coming weekend, Saturday and Sunday, the 9th and 10th, we'll have the Triangle Bonsai Society will be out here having a show. So 3 o'clock on Friday and then 10 a.m. on, 3 p.m. on Saturday, and then again 10 a.m. on Sunday. So come on out and visit with them. Another activity that's really nice, especially when it's hot. And right now, I just looked at the temperature, and it says it feels like 107 degrees, and I would agree with that. It is way hotter than 106, and doesn't feel anything like 108. But on Tuesday, the July 12th, we have our evening garden stroll. So we'll be open from 4:30 to 7:30 in the evening after our normal hours. So you can come out, you can see the Arboretum when it's starting to cool down. And you can also, we have our annual color trials going on. We have a big field day for professionals in the following week on the 14th. That's a paid program on site, but we're going to have people come out for our evening garden stroll, come and put flags out by their favorite annuals in our annual trial, so that the nurserymen and landscapers can see what people really like, and hopefully those varieties will be available in your garden center next year after they see what it is you really like out there. Lots more going on. Saturday the 16th, there's a bearded iris sale out here at the Arboretum. Go to our website, jcra.ncsu.edu. Look at our calendar. There's so many things happening. It's hard to talk about them all. So, I want to welcome everybody again to Gardening 101. I'm Mark Weathington, the Director of the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, and today we're going to talk about a subject that gets brought up to me time and time again: dry shade. How do I deal with dry shade? And I have a woodland garden. I'm gardening under oaks and maples and beeches and pines, and it is very dry here at the Arboretum. You know, the Arboretum, it's trees, but we garden under those, so we have a lot of dry shade here as well. And you know, how you manage that can be difficult. Obviously you can water, but people wouldn't be worrying about dry shade if they had easy access to water. But I'm going to talk about a few strategies, and one of those strategies does deal with irrigating your plants, and that's something we talk about anywhere in the garden, not just in dry shade, but grouping your plants based on what conditions they need and how much maintenance you want to give them. So if you have a dry, shady spot closer to the house, if you put more of your plants that need more water, you know, think hydrangeas and hosta and things like that, put them closer to your house where you have access to water. And then in the areas that are farther out, you put some other drought tolerant plants, and I'll talk about some plants as well as some strategies. But that's one way to deal with it, and we tell people that as part of kind of basic landscape design. No matter where, put your highest maintenance plants closer to your living areas, because you're more likely to take the time to maintain those. But there are other ways. One thing we often see is that people try to get rid of water that's coming off their house as quickly as they can. They want it to get out to storm drains. They want to get it piped away as quickly as possible. And I encourage people, if you can rather than have your drains come down and just hit a splash pad or something like that, is either to keep that water ideally above grade and keep it daylighted and run it to an area where you would like water to come into. But a lot of people don't like that look, or maybe it's the distance is too far, or it would, there's a path or something in the way. And so what I've done in my garden in several areas is I've got, it piped, just black corrugated tubing buried from my downspouts that goes out to my woodland area. And then I've put a T on it and put a pipe perpendicular to my drain line that's a corrugated pipe with holes in it. Now, usually you're using those to drain things away, but this is actually so that the water comes out and it spreads out laterally and escapes through those holes, and it keeps some moisture in the soil. And so where I do that, I can plant plants that need a little bit more water closer to that, and the drier plants farther away. Now, it helps that I'm on a slope. If you're in a very flat spot, then you have to, that pipe has to go down, and so you got to keep digging that trench deeper and deeper as you go, which can be a little difficult. Another great strategy is to put something in, and it might be boulders and stones. It might be a block wall like I'm sitting on. It may just be some earth berms, and I've got one of those behind me as well. And what that does is it captures the water. You direct the water, the rainfall into these areas, again, assuming you have some sort of slope, and you slow it down. And that way you can really get moisture into the soil, not just where you have the depression, but the water goes in there and it'll flow laterally through the soil. So below this depression, and also where this wall kind of blocks the water, we're able to grow begonias that aren't crashing in this 100-degree heat, because we've got moisture in the soil here. And so that's an easy way. And the other thing that does is you are adding some soil where you're stopping that water, so you can bring in organic matter and soils that will retain more water. Now, if you've got a lot of energy, you can go in and really amend all your soils everywhere, and that helps with your that organic matter helps to hold moisture in the soil. But if you're like me, it's hard enough to dig a hole for a plant, because it's, you've got all the roots and everything in there. So, digging amendments in can be difficult, but you can put organic matter on top of your soil, and that helps. And that can be a compost, something that's already broken down, or just leaves in your garden. I just let the leaves fall in my woodland and leave them in the beds. I don't take them out. I know other people who rake them all out of their beds into pathways and go over them with a mower to chop them up so they break down quicker and look a little bit nicer, and then put them back in the beds to help build that soil. And that's a slowish process, but it does help over time. The other thing in getting into the plants, and this is counterintuitive to a lot of people, but smaller plants will establish quicker and be better performers if you're planting around tree roots, you're planting in these dry sites. People think I should get a big plant because it'll have the best chance of surviving. But just think that you put that big plant in there, it needs a lot of water for that big plant. And even when it starts rooting out, because no matter what with a plant, you've got to water till it gets established. But it starts rooting out, and you get a couple inches of roots going out all around there. It's still not getting enough water for that big plant. Whereas a little plant, once it starts rooting out, it's going to be able to get enough water to keep it going. So really, I plant very small plants. Always, if there's a choice between big and small, I go with a smaller one. Pints, quarts, 1 gallons. I don't even like to do 3-gallon containers if I have my choice. I'm also lazy and don't like to dig big holes, but I find I can plant right up next to oaks, which just suck up all the water, and my plants do fine like that. I water them in really well. If we go through extended, very hot, dry periods, I will water them as needed. I've got a couple of ways of doing that. I can pull a hose to many areas of my garden. I've got some long hoses, and I'll do that on occasion, but I really hate doing that. I've got some watering cans, some big watering cans that I can take out and spot water. I do, where I don't have my rain, my gutters piped out, I have some rain barrels, and I have, in some areas, I have 1 rain barrel where I can hook up a hose and go to it, but I have a couple where I have a rain barrel and then it is piped just with a hose. Again, I'm on a slope, so this makes it easier, but it is piped to another rain barrel. So I've got basically 2 cisterns, and my first one will, as it fills, it fills the other one, and that other one is down by an area in my woodland where I have trouble getting hoses to. So it's not dealing with the dry shade so much as giving me access to water that I wouldn't otherwise have. And I only use that really when I really, really need it. My other method I learned from my grandfather in Florida. He would plant palm trees out at his house, and I thought he was a genius with how he dealt with them, how he watered them. He had 2 5-gallon buckets, and he put a nail hole or something, melt a hole through one of those buckets. He put the bucket with the hole, 1 or 2 holes in there. He put that bucket inside the other bucket, fill it up with water, take it out to his tree and pull out the bucket with the hole in it and just set that there by his tree, and it would slowly leak out. It's kind of like one of those gator bags you could buy, but he got them, those big pickle buckets, for free somewhere, and he would do that, and he put a whole line of them out and let it slowly, really slowly, as a small hole, because you want to get that water deep. So talking about water and getting your plants adapted for their dry shade spot is important, because one of the problems people have is they want to water everything. They want to water it now. They want to get it done quick. And so when you water too quickly. If you're trying to water anything besides a few newly planted things or a few things that are crashing, you should never water by hand. You just will not stand there long enough to really soak the soil. You want to encourage roots to go deep before they spread out. And the way to do that is to water deeply, but infrequently. So when you water, use a sprinkler. When you're watering a whole garden area, use a sprinkler or a soaker hose and let it run for a long time, because you want that water to really penetrate the soil. Instead of doing it lightly where you're only watering the top, half an inch of your soil, and it's going to evaporate quickly. Somewhere I heard, I was taught that you need to give your garden an inch of water a week. I don't even know really what that means. An inch of water is not a whole lot. What I do is when I set a sprinkler, I set it for, if it's going in a full circle, 90 minutes, 2 hours, because I want it to be saturated. And you put your sprinkler out there and just go dig a little test hole somewhere, and after it's run for a while, and see what it does. And you'd be surprised at how long it takes to really get that moisture in. And do that infrequently. Don't do that often. Do it only when you absolutely have to, because the more you stress your plants, the stronger they will ultimately be when you're talking about this, because they're forced to really try and get those roots out there to exploit their water needs. So, talk about a few plants really quickly. They're just, people always talk about, oh, there's no plants for dry shade, but there are so many plants. I took a couple of cuttings of some favorites of mine. This is Fatsia japonica, the Japanese Fatsia. It's a really, really neat tropical looking plant. Big bold foliage. Flowers in the fall with little kind of white, little Sputnik flowers, and then you get little black fruits on there. Really, really drought tolerant once it's established. I'm going to try not to keep saying that, but you got to water your plants and get them established. Nothing can go in the ground and be just fine there until it roots in. And with a small plant, that's usually just one season. Larger plants, it can take it more years to really get established. But I've seen the Fatsia planted in Japan just under highway overpasses where they never are directly watered. They're basically living off of the humidity in the air. They're really, really drought tolerant. Great shrub. Another one, people who know me know is a favorite of mine is Akuba. Akuba Japonica is an easy dry shade plant. There are gold speckled ones, the most common, the gold dust plants, but there are ones with really bright variegation. Many of them, like this one, is much brighter in full sun, but still nice when you get it into deep, dry shade. And they are tough as nails. As I say, we're told to me dismissively in England that they are parking lot plants. And yeah, if you can survive in a parking lot, you can survive anywhere. Now, a relatively close-ish relative to Akuba, believe it or not, are boxwoods. And boxwoods, people think of them needing full sun. They're actually shade plants. That's where most of them grow naturally, is in forests. And a boxwood in deep shade doesn't look the same as, the boxwood in front of an old colonial brick house like I grew up in with the round little boxwoods in there. They tend to be a little more open and a little bit looser and a little more graceful in my mind. But they are great in the shade, and they're just incredibly drought tolerant plants. And so I really encourage people to do that more. And there's some great boxwoods that you probably wouldn't put in front of your brick colonial house. There are ones that are really brightly variegated, like Elegantissima with a white edge around all the leaves. There are weeping ones. There are ones with kind of speckled variegation on there, and they can really brighten up a garden spot. So boxwoods are another great one. A plant that I never would have thought was suitable for really dry shade spots is this conifer. This is a Podocarpus macrophyllus, the Japanese podocarp. This plant grows in sun or shade. It's got, it doesn't look like a conifer. It's got these needles which are broad and flat. But in 2007, we had a 100-year drought here in Raleigh. And I started noticing how good all of the Podocarpus macrophyllus we were growing at the Arboretum looked. And we had some in tough spots up by our parking lot in full sun, in our Asian Valley under the tall trees where I am. And all of them did just fine in that 100-year drought, even without getting a drop of water. And these are great for people who like, more control in their garden, because you can let them grow naturally, or you can shear them into little boxes and balls and chickens and elephants, whatever you want to shear them into. You can do that with these. You can do that with the boxwoods too, I suppose. But great for dry shade. Going into the more herbaceous plants, because, you know, if you've got shade, you probably have got some, you've already got trees and shrubs and things, and you're looking for the things underneath. So aspidistra, or cast iron plant, a great plant for that. These are 3 different types. You can see one with these pale spots on it. These 2 with brighter white spots, but, you know, one is very narrow and one is wider. These are all just different species and selections of cast iron plant, and there are hundreds of different selections, some with more gold, some with striping, some with solid green. I love them all. The deer don't generally bother them. They're evergreen. And, you know, they will tolerate the driest of dry spots in your garden with no problem at all. And it's interesting. I noticed that a lot of the evergreen perennials are more tolerant of drought than some of the other ones. And that may be that they're really, you know, they can shut themselves down a little bit easier because they are there year round. So they're photosynthesizing all winter long. Often, you know, if they're under deciduous trees, that's when they're really getting the most sunlight. And so they can kind of slow down and not be in a rush over the summer, which is good for plants in dry shade. Here behind me, let me move that out of the way, is another plant. This is rhodia. Rhodia are sometimes called sacred lily. And there are a bunch of different ones of these with variegated leaves and contorted and twisted leaves. But this is another one that is ideal for dry shade. Neither one of these are very showy in flower. The aspidistra will have really interesting flowers. They look like something out of science fiction, but they're down on ground level at the base, so most people don't even notice them. Rhodia has little spikes of green flowers, which are interesting, but you got to get up close to the plant. But then it's followed by bright red berries. So, you know, evergreen foliage and then those bright red berries. Again, another one that deer tend to stay away from. There are lots of other drought-tolerant perennials. Some of the ones that pop up often in lists are hellebores and epimedium, or bishop's cap, or fairy's wings, whichever one you want to call it. All are great, great drought-tolerant plants. The fragrant, now I'm losing the name on it, Sarcococa, sometimes sweet box, thank you. That's another boxwood, very, very close boxwood relative. Sweet box, great fragrant flowers in the winter, evergreen foliage. There are different ones you can get of varying heights, but there's some really nice ones called Fragrant Mountain and Fragrant Valley that are lower and they'll spread to form a nice mass. Those are very, very good. There are actually some ferns. People think of ferns as always wanting very moist soils, but actually here with me, a little bit behind me, there's a blechnum that's pretty drought tolerant. Our native, some of our native Dryopteris are very drought tolerant. The autumn fern, Dryopteris erythrosora, is one that's very, very good in dry situations. So there's a lot of plants out there that are quite drought tolerant. And I'd encourage people, if you're near the Arboretum, come out on one of these hot days and look around at what's growing under old established trees. We do water some, but not much. And mostly we water to keep plants alive, but not, we don't give them regular water, except in our lath house. Don't look for drought tolerant plants in the lath house. They may be drought tolerant, but they're getting regular water there. But come through some of the other areas, our Winter Garden, our Asian Valley, and Plantsman's Woods, and look at the plants that really seem to be thriving. If you're not in the area, go to a garden in your area and talk to people that work there. Ask them what areas of the garden they don't water frequently, and look at the plants there. One other thing, last thing I'll say is the more plants you get in, the more the roots that are in the soil will break up the soil, which will help the tilth, the structure, which will help retain more water. As plants die, which they inevitably do, they break down there, and the roots and and help put organic matter in the soil. So it's all a cycle. And if you look at it as, I'm going to find some good plants that will tolerate this, and then I'm going to do what I can, put in what effort I want into amending the soil, getting water to plants, but really it's being okay with them flagging a little bit in the middle of the day. Just because something's wilted on a 95-degree day does not mean it needs water. Go out in the morning after it has time to rest and it's popped back up. Now, if it's not popping back up, that's where you really need to put some water in. Do we have any questions online?
Yeah, there's a few. Some people wanted to know about any fern types for dry shade.
So I mentioned, the question was about ferns for dry shade. I mentioned a few ferns. The Dryopteris, the sensitive fern is very, very drought tolerant. Onoclea sensibilis, very drought tolerant. There's also quite a few of these different unferny-like ferns. This is a Neoliposaurus. Say that 3 times fast. This is one that has been very drought tolerant for us. Very easy plant. Some of the epiphytic ferns, which this one's epiphytic in the wild, but pyrosias, once established, are fairly drought tolerant. They want to be on a slope. They don't like to grow flat. But yeah, some of the look for ferns with a little bit thicker texture. The holly ferns are fairly drought tolerant as well.
Marilyn Gist is asking, there are presumably tree roots under the added soil behind the stone wall where Mark is sitting. How deep can you add soil on top of tree and large old shrub roots without harming them? And how far do you stay away from tree or shrub trunks?
That is a great question. And it's hard to give a hard and fast to that, because some of it depends on the tree type. We have, in this area of Asian Valley, we have piled, when we were first developing it, we brought in quite a bit of soil and put on top of the tree roots. We mixed in about 30% permatil, which is an expanded slate product, which keeps air in the soil. So there's the main thing that you're doing when you put soil on top of tree roots is you are taking the oxygen out there. Plants' roots need water and oxygen. And the ideal soil, if you go take a soils class, would be 50% of the structure, 50% soil, 25% water, 25% airspace. So you don't want to just add a ton of heavy, topsoil onto a tree roots. If you're using something that's light and fluffy, you can put 12, 18, 24 inches on the soil. You want to keep it 3 feet away from the trunk. You don't want to build soil up right up to the trunk. But otherwise, I know people who have done a lot of soil, 4 or 5 feet deep, but not all the way around the tree. You're doing it on one side, and the tree roots will grow up into the mounded soil, so they'll be okay in the long run. It's just you don't want to completely smother the roots. So you want to leave at least half of the tree roots uncovered if you're going that deep.
How about native plants or pollinator-friendly plants for dry shade?
Okay, native plants for dry shade. Oh gosh, there are a lot of native plants that will tolerate dry shade. A lot of our spring ephemerals are very good for dry shade because we are getting moisture in the spring typically, and so by the time it dries out, they're going dormant. Thinking May-apples and things like that. So those are always good. Our native crested iris cristata, that's a great plant. If you ever are out hiking and you see it, you'll come over, kind of a shady mountain ridge, and then go down the other side where it's really dry, and that's where you'll always find the iris cristata growing wild, or almost always. Witch hazels are fairly drought tolerant. Fothergilla is quite drought tolerant once it's established. Trying to think of right just off the top of my head what's out there. Bayberries, Myrica or Morella cerifera is a great native shrub. Pollinator plants, there are a lot of pollinators out there, and they're not all attracted to bright, showy red flowers. We tend to forget that most pollination in the wild is done by solitary bees and wasps and flies and other insects. So if you've got flowers on your plants, chances are some pollinator is utilizing it.
Okay, we got Angela Foster is asking about Ruscus X microglossus. Does that do well in shade?
Yes. So Ruscus, Ruscus looks a lot like the sweet box we talked about in some ways. It's a glossy foliaged evergreen kind of low shrub. All of the Ruscus microglossum, Ruscus Hircanus, all the Ruscus do great. Some are quite spiny and tough, but they're all great. And another one that I kind of put in that same category, very similar looking, is the poet's laurel, Danae racemosa, another great drought tolerant plant for shade.
And Joe Biddle is asking about hurricane lilies.
Hurricane lilies, yeah. So hurricane lilies or naked ladies, Lycoris, they're surprise lilies. They have all kinds of names. They will grow in dry shade. My experience with them is they don't flower terribly well in dry shade. They don't flower terribly well in shade, I should say. That's been my experience. The Adamasco lilies, our native Zephranthes, that is, I don't grow in, it's much more shade tolerant, but my experience with that is it really wants a much more moist soil. It doesn't really want dry shade.
Diane Schaefer is asking, when can Iris cristata be moved?
When can Iris cristata be moved? Oh, anytime. If you have a big patch and you're dividing them, I always tell people divide their iris right after it finishes flowering, because that gives it time to settle in and it'll flower for you the next season, as opposed to doing it in the fall, but you can do it in the fall. Now, if you divide or move your iris in the middle of the summer, you're going to need to do a lot more watering. You know, if you do it in the fall or early spring, when we have some moisture, some rain, you don't really, you know, water it to settle it in, but it should be fine other than that.
And that appears to be all of the questions we have online.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for Gardening 101. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. And, you know, if there is a gardening topic that you'd like us to cover, a how-to in the garden or about certain plants or any garden topic, you know, let us know. You can send a note to JCRA programs at ncsu.edu, and we will we can look at those, and you know, we want to get you the information you want. So feel free to let us know what you're interested in. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next week.